Hey, what do you guys say we go on a little bit of adventure talking about this bin site right here, and just how a couple of years ago it started with just one grain bin, and now we're at this stage of the project, and also what our next steps are for moving forward with this project. What is our next project? But before we do that, those of you that have been watching the channel know that we did a fundraiser for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation as we were getting the crop in the ground. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the crop is in the ground. So that means it's time for us to close out the fundraiser. This year, in between the GoFundMe page and then also some private donations, we made ourselves over $3,500 to go to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, all getting donated under my nephew Jet's name. Feels good to do something good like that. And also, I couldn't have done it without you guys. So thank you from us, and of course, from Jet. So to travel forward with this project, let's travel backwards in the work that we've done with GSI. When I first started chatting with GSI, basically, we talked about, well, what resources do you guys need, you know, for making grain storage decisions? It just so happened that I was also investing into the grain storage facilities that we have on the farm. Backstep a little bit, this here is my dad's property. My farm is the farm across the road. But as an operation in between mine, my dad's, and what we farm together, does not make sense for us to really be building on two different locations. So that's why we've expanded this facility. But realistically, some things just work out. I, of course, being a YouTuber, when I go to look to make these decisions, I jump on the YouTube to try and find as much research and knowledge about things that other farmers have done or people have done in the past, what actually, you know, manufacturers put out for helping us make the decisions. And I found that there's actually a big gaping hole in between, hey, you need to maybe consider some of these things when you're actually considering building a bin site kind of from scratch. It wasn't exactly from scratch from us, but Dad did start this site, which I think that bin was built in 09. This bin and this bin were built in 21. And of course, this bin was built in 22. So I said, hey, my goal, if I work with you guys, is to actually come out with videos on things that I want to see, you know, or I look for in making a grain bin facility, because this is an investment, a very large investment that I plan on using in my entire career. And GSI said, hey, I think that'd be an awesome resource for our customers that are in the same position that you are. Let's run with it. So during this video, I'm going to be using some 3D renderings to give you guys kind of an idea of what I'm talking about. Bear with me, I'm a little bit new to that program, but hopefully that gives you a little bit better idea of the projects that are coming in the future and where we've come from, or I guess built upon. And I was seriously working on an actual project that would go right there this year, but some other things happened, like the pumpkin patch project. Then also another surprise that'll be coming here in a few videos for you guys. So I had to put that project on hold for this year at least. Hopefully we can take it on next year. Depends on how things like the pumpkin patch do, how well the crops grow, and where our prices end up. Because yeah, we just got quarter-inch of rain, but we are dry. But there is no getting around the fact that we could use the storage. So let's do a hot rewind here. Like I said, that bin right there, the one that's a little bit different colored, was built, I think, in 09. Don't quote me on that. 09, 12, I don't know, somewhere around there. It's probably around a 10-year-old bin. That was the only grain bin on this facility until 2 years ago when Dad built that grain bin and that grain bin, which are basically identical grain bins, or those are triplets, except for this one in the middle is not a stiffened bin. Stiffened bin are those running down the ridges right there, which are called stiffeners, and you actually got to see those be made when we toured the GSI plant. Also one of the videos that we did with them. So last year, again, in all the research, we talked about choosing your bin site location, and this bin site here actually checked off a whole lot of those sites, things that we needed. Being close to a paved road, so you can easily get your grain in and get your grain out. Having available power, like 3-phase for your bin site. Having good traffic flow. Room for expansion, which you guys are going to see here in just a minute. Having a good size wet bin, example A. And realistically, the only thing that this did not check off as a bin site is that we do have natural gas right here, but we do have good LP suppliers in the area, so we do have the ability to dry grain. when we get a grain dryer. So that's the first thing we learned, was choosing this location. Of course, then we continue to build onto this and fix some things up. So last year, and also the videos, you saw me bring in 3-phase power, which comes from this pole across the road, gets buried. You can actually still see the trench somewhat. It hasn't completely settled out, to the transformer on the pad, and we now have 3-phase power, which is actually industrial 3-phase power. So I've made the investment to have pretty much all the expansion that we want in the future. And then of course we improved our road situation. There used to be a road kind of jetted off here, you kind of jetted off there. That used to be a big swale. That got fabriced in, and then we also expanded this part of the road to be able to move in and out of here easily. Just made the flowability of the traffic easier. Again, something that they said to do, and we've done. But there is one thing that was not on that list that I think should be on that list, and that is managing your investment that you have put into these grain bins, which we learned a lot about last year, installing the grain view system onto this grain bin. This will monitor the bin and the crop that's in the bin. Basically, it's like giving your grain bin a brain. It will control the fans. It can dry grain for you. Using natural air, it can actually rehydrate grain for you. And it can tell you, hey, you got something going wrong in there. You might want to come check it out. So that one there, I think, should be added to the checklists of things to be considering when building a storage system. So to the models here, let's just say we started with these 3 bins. Basically, those 3 bins are my dad's bins. I only own this bin right here. Well, me and the bank. We are real world farming here, boys and girls. That's got a payment on it. Hence why it is important for us to have a plan while still remaining flexible to be able to change within that plan while maintaining the same goals that we have. So with these 3 bins, we still needed storage, and so here's what I decided to invest in last year. This is my 18,500 bushel wet bin, 30 foot by 8 rings, I believe. But if you actually look, all of the tops of the bins are in line with each other. Like I said, we need storage, and that's what's got the biggest ROI for us, is the storage. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think has the biggest ROI, but for us, it's storage. It's not quite with the ability to dry grain, but I think there's a way to get around that. We'll talk about that in a second. So last year, basically, this was an $80,000 project. Not necessarily for the bin, because I'm including 3-phase on this, and my 3-phase was really darn cheap. In all rights considered, it cost me a little over $8,000 to have the pole in the ground and the buried to the pad right there. A little over 8, probably closer to 9 if you want to include the pad and stuff like that, which you should. So I went a little bit over budget, go figure, right? But that was an $80,000 project. Bin prices have increased with everything in the world, so that's what my budget allowed for me to check off in our plan to expand, and I am very happy that I've done it. So back to the model, we are now at this stage here, which has 3 42 by 7 ring bins, and then also the 30 by 8 ring wet bin. So now is when I'm going to reveal to you guys what the next steps are, as long as nothing drastically changes. Blueprint moving forward, but like I said, another thing that I feel is very important is to have a design that allows you to stay somewhat flexible when you're wanting to do these things, because when I've talked to a few people about their bin setups, is a lot of them always say, man, I wish I would have done this differently. And that is what I'm trying to avoid, is at some point me saying, oh, I really wish I would have done this differently. Most likely the next stage of this bin site is to continue to build these 42 by 7s and flipping them over this way, just basically rotating them 180 degrees so that there'll be a row of unloads right here, pretty much mirroring those bins. The reason that we want to do that, it would be nice to go a little bit taller with your bins to get more storage, but at that point in time we start to need a different auger, taller augers, things along those lines, so we can do that, capturing more storage, with a little asterisk in there here in a second we'll talk about, while not having to bring on a capital investment for things like a grain leg. Even though a grain leg would be super nice to have, but like I said, my budget only goes so far, so I need to look at the things that have the biggest ROI, looping back to storage. So when we mirror those grain bins, we'll be able to take this road, grade it down so it's a little bit nicer of a slope, get this drainage situation figured out so that we're not pooling any water there, but bring a road out through this way, loop it around kind of where the front of the soybean plot is, and then you'll have another road here, basically giving us a big old arch all the way around. By doing that, that would also open us up to the ability to have another bin that would be an oddball bin, because imagine there's going to be a big open area right there. Since it is sunken in a little bit, that means that we think we could probably get a wider diameter bin, a little bit taller, increasing the storage, so you could have a really fat bin kind of plucked right there. So what was I considering trying to take on this year? I was considering trying to build another 42 by 7 ring bin, but I would put a grain view system into it, and I'd put a grain view system into it and pair it with two 15 horsepower fans, giving us basically, if you remember us chatting about it a little bit, pretty much if you have 1 horsepower per 1,000 on your storage, that'll give you the ability to use the grain view system to hopefully bring down the moisture of that grain, increasing my comfort level of what the moisture would be of putting grain into a bin like this, while also having the peace of mind that the grain view system is going to monitor it. So if there is something that starts to go bad with it, where it's not being able to bring down the moisture because your humidity is too high, all the things that it takes into its parameters of when it wants to dry, then I can know, hey, it's time to get that grain out, get it shipped off, because it's not going to keep the way that I wanted it to. That's where I do that. And realistically, I would do that with this bin, and that next bin, which then would give you the ability, pretty much as that air tries to push up through that grain, it creates a static pressure. So the more grain that you have in there, the harder it is to move that air through that grain. So what you could end up doing is, if you could just imagine starting out and putting like to that level of the grain in there, and then moving to the next bin, putting that level in there, moving to the next bin, putting that level in there, it's going to have the ability to kind of push the air up through there. Yes, that would be a headache, because you're moving an auger probably every day, or maybe halfway through a day or something along those lines. You just can't set your auger and fill a bin up. You'd have to be moving. But for us, drying grain is not a huge deal. Most years we can get there, unless we have a late spring. Like, I don't expect us to have a lot of late wet grain this year, so we'll probably still dry grain in my dad's dryer bin, a few loads, and then dump it on out. Where the dryer would pay for me is actually giving me days in the fall to install drainage tile, because storage and drainage tile, in my opinion, are the two highest ROIs on your farm, which are the two things that I continue to focus on investing in, so the two there can work together again. And also with the realization that you farm more and more acres every single year, and they don't make any more days in the year for you to get harvest done, and the time saver that grain bins are, those kind of also work in pair. So next phase of the project would be to continue to build these type of grain bins just down that way, double the fan horsepower, and put a grain view system into each one of those bins. So now you might have noticed, hey Ben, you put your unload system on this bin facing the opposite way all the other grain bins are facing. If you notice in those models, this bin does not have a twin to it right here. And actually kind of this whole area right here is left blank. And that's where we're going to remain flexible. So, like I said, at some point in time, I want to have the drying capacity or drying capabilities. Now, GSI offers a lot of different options for me to look at, and I've changed my mind on what I would kind of like to do a couple of times. So, first thing that I've looked at, and I looked at really hard, I still like the idea of, is a GSI top dry. We'll mirror it right here, but in the top of the grain bin is a drying system, like a screen floor, and the grain goes into the top of it, and then will fill down into the bottom, and then actually you gain storage underneath the top dry of all the dry grain that was put in there. You use the fan to push heat back up through, and then you're burning up top. Seems like a pretty efficient way to dry grain and gain storage, so a good use of your money. That's why I kind of like top dries. But I also need to consider the capacity that I might want to use in the future. Like I said, this is an 18,500 bushel grain bin, not a hopper bottom, so we'll just leave grain in the bottom of the wet bin. To pull the grain out, you'll have to do a couple of things special with that. We can talk about that in the future. But that should basically be a 15,000 bushel wet bin. If you can dry, say 1,000 bushels an hour at 5 points, we're way golden pretty much. You do never know what the future holds. So the other options that we can look at is a continuous flow dryer. What's attractive about the continuous flow dryer is if I went to a top dry system, most likely I would have to put the leg in, because you're going to need to be able to basically supply grain to the top of that continuously through the wet holding bin as it dries, and then unload it and distribute it to the other bins. If you used a continuous flow system, basically we could take an auger, shoot it off to right there, to the top of a dryer. It would be sitting right there with an air system, and then air system to all those bins and the other ones in the future as well. That's what's really attractive about the continuous flow dryer. And there's always the option of the tower dryer, which looks like a tall, skinny grain bin made out of mesh. Those are darn nice dryers. I think that right now they would also actually dry a little bit more than I have the capacity to dry with them. So I'm still kind of looking at the top dry or a smaller continuous flow dryer, but remain flexible. You jump into the model. We'll look at it here in a second. The plan would be to put a tower basically right here in this location. If you remember when we were on that end of the bin site, we talked about it bringing a road up and around here. It'll be wide enough that a semi can take off through that area. So there's where your leg would be. The future possibilities of a pit would be right here. And then in the future, that building right there might reach its life expectancy. And then I could realistically look at putting up some bigger grain storage bins, start plopping them along this line right here, kind of same way down that way. Do I think I'll ever get to that point in my life? No. But is it possible, if there's another generation that wants to keep farming, that they could? Yeah. So kind of plan for them in the future, but that's the plan. Like I said, unfortunately can't take on a project this year. Really wish I could, but we're gonna pause on that one. Those are the plans moving forward in the future. Now you guys know, in the next GSI video, we'll be talking about what the real world economics looked like for me with that grain bin last year, and how well it did or did not pay for itself. I want to hear what you guys thought about things that you've done on your bin sites, on your farms, what things you like, what things you don't like, what things you can highly recommend or to stay away from. What's your biggest ROI? Let's talk about it. And of course, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button on the way out if you haven't already, and we'll see you guys in the next one.